So today we have Benny Lewis and other people who are in the +1 challenge.
Good morning, Vietnam.
And well, since the challenge we are approaching 30 days mark in a 90 days challenge. So I thought it would be great to invite Benny to join the +1 hangout so he can answer some burning questions from other +1 challengers that we have. So thank you so much, Benny, for spending your time and hanging with us here.
No problem at all. I'm very happy to chat to everybody. And today is my 1 month point in my Japanese project.
Oh, nice, nice. Okay, so we only got 30 minutes. So go ahead, Anton.
All right, so my question is, what do you do to stay motivated, and what do you do to make learning a new language fun?
What I do to stay motivated is the consistent Skype sessions that I have every single day. I find that pressures me. The fact that I know I'm going to be like digitally face to face with another human being, I find that I have no choice but to do last minute study. And on the days that I don't have a Skype session, I find I lose that motivation, and I may not actually do any study that day. That's why I make sure I have a Skype session every day. It gives me the motivation. And what was your other question?
What do you do to make it fun? Instead of getting bored doing the same thing over and over again.
Right. So I think I was browsing through the questions in advance. People wanted to know generally what I do on a day-to-day basis. And like relevant to your question, I always focus my week on what my biggest problem that week is. So, for instance, this week my biggest problem is grammar. And a lot of people who are familiar with my advice for learning the language will know I recommend against learning grammar as a beginner learner. I think it's better to get into the language, make mistakes, speak in set sentences. And I did that, and I'm comfortable with that. And I find now my biggest problem is I'm fixing the grammatical structures of sentences, understanding how verbs work, and so on. And that keeps it interesting for me, is that each week I have a completely different study process. So if I describe to you the way my study process works this week, that's going to be completely different to how it will be in 3 weeks. It's completely different to how it was my first and second week. And by changing my focus, so I don't do the same thing week in, week out, I think to myself, what is the biggest problem? The biggest problem my first week was I needed to get used to the sounds of Japanese. So I got on Skype and I just listened to them talk and I just read off a couple of phrases. Now my biggest problem is grammatical. So when I study for a Skype session, and then in the Skype session, I'm trying to use all these features, trying to talk in the past tense or use a particular verb structure, like saying I want to. And this way, every single week, it's different.
Got it. Cool. Next question.
Who's next?
Fernando.
My question is about improving vocabulary. In my case, I divided the language in two pieces, grammar and vocabulary. The grammar is easy to me, since the languages are Romance and that stuff. But in the vocabulary, I'm stuck, because I don't know how to learn, or even what words to learn, because there are lots of words that I won't use in my spoken language. So I would like to know, how do you select the words you are going to learn, and how do you do to keep them in your brain, to memorize them?
So vocab study was a big priority for me last week. And rather than, like, one thing you can do is you can go on Anki and find that there are pre-made decks for the top 500 or top 1,000 words, depending on the language. But there are very good decks on Anki. And for most people, the most popular decks are a good one to go for. But your level may be higher than that. So what I tend to do, especially in later stages, is I have either a language partner, or what I do, because I coordinate the blog, my earnings from the blog, put them into my language project. I actually have a Japanese assistant that I pay for a couple of hours a week, and she does all of these tasks for me. So I actually send her a big list of words in English that I want to be able to know in Japanese. So let's say I'm at like the B2 level and I feel like I'm ready to start talking about something technical like my engineering field, or explaining the code behind my blog, or even with Japanese, I want to learn the vocabulary related to Dragon Ball Z at some stage, so I can start talking about all of the things the characters do. So I find that vocabulary and send a list to this lady who will create an Anki deck for me. And it doesn't end up costing so much money, but I invest in that. What you could also do is run your list through your language partner and have them, they will create it for you and put it into Anki. So this way you actually have a list of very relevant things. Otherwise, there are grammar books, and in Spanish here somewhere. Sorry, not grammar books. There are books for learning vocabulary where they categorize the vocabulary into particular themes. And the later chapters, if you're an advanced learner, the later chapters are very good because they start to get into more technical vocabulary. Otherwise, I know a lot of people are a fan of reading a lot, and especially at the C levels, I would read as much as possible. I would use a tool like Learning with Text, which, by the way, I'm completely overhauling on my blog, and it's been buggy lately, but it's going to run super fast from this week on. And so you import text into that, read through it, and highlight text that you're not familiar with. So lots and lots of reading of advanced topics that you're comfortable with, and noting the vocabulary that you don't understand. And to actually learn the vocabulary, I use a combination of flashcarding in Anki and the keyword method or image association. So I would see a new word come up in Anki. Another alternative is I would use memrise.com, because they have pre-made mnemonics for words. So that's a combination of spaced repetition system. And when you see the word, rather than just repeating it over and over until it finally sinks in, the first time I see it, I think to myself, what does it look like? What word does it resemble in English or another language that I know? And how can I make a mental association in that way? So this way, I come up with new vocabulary and try to learn it, but I see the word in a spaced repetition system so that I would see it before I forget. So a combination. Oh, sorry. Sorry, something happened with my camera there. Somebody pressed the capture button. I don't know what that is.
I don't know what that is either.
Can everyone see me?
Yeah, I see it.
Lena, what are you doing?
Elena, whatever. You're adding Google effects. Please don't do that, Elena.
Just stop.
I'm sorry. my camera doesn't work. I don't know how to appear.
You're breaking
Don't worry about
our
it.
hangout here.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, I've answered that question anyway, so we can move on to the next one.
All right, Yin.
Okay, so I've been learning Italian for quite a while, and now I'm just picking up Spanish, which I know are very similar languages, and like the previous question, I've been dealing with more vocab problems than grammar, because the grammatical structure is very similar. But I've been reading and definitely listening to a lot of Spanish music, but the problem comes with actually when being presented with an opportunity to speak with someone in Spanish. I kind of have like almost a freak out mode, and I like forget everything, but it's really difficult to try and like use the words that I already know as a, like just to grab them and actually like be able to use them.
Yeah, because the problem with this is like it's just a lack of familiarity of the Spanish words coming out of your mouth, essentially. So like what I do, I have these moments too as I begin any language, and like last week I piled a ton of Japanese vocabulary into my head, and yet when I got on Skype and I wanted to say the word, it wasn't coming out. And as a beginner learner, when I was learning Spanish and Italian, it'd be the same, that I'd be kind of confident reading, especially after I learned Spanish and I got to Italian and then French. By reading, I recognized a lot because they're similar languages. When the opportunity to speak came, I kind of felt tongue-tied. And the way I got around this was to just force myself to go into as many more speaking opportunities as I could, because it's the kind of thing that you have to get this feeling out of your system. This feeling is a lack of familiarity in speaking the language. So the more you try to speak the language, the less tongue-tied you'll be. So I would just keep trying to put yourself in front of somebody. It's going to be awkward. It's going to feel embarrassing. But the more times you do it, the less awkward, the less embarrassing it will be until eventually you feel comfortable using the language. And especially, I would recommend, since Spanish and Italian are similar, I would recommend actually switching back to Italian as often as you can, finding people to speak Italian with, ideally, if possible, immediately after your Spanish session, because then your brain will get used to compartmentalizing the languages. And this way, you're not going to merge, turn your Spanish, your Italian into Spanish and lose your Italian. And this is how I separate all the languages, including very similar languages in my head. So I can constantly try to practice them. I go to couch surfing meetings, and I Skype people in these languages, one after the other. And then I learn how, like, I will start making an Italian mistake in Spanish. Somebody will correct me, and that kind of embarrassment of having made the mistake burns it into my mind when speaking Spanish. Don't make that mistake. So, like, for instance, when I got back into speaking Italian, I had too much Spanish in my head, and as you know, to say there is or there are, there's only one word in Spanish, I, but in Italian, there's two ways. It's like in English, you say c'è or ci sono. And I kept saying c'è for the plural. I would say c'è, whatever, you know, molte something. There is a lot of something. And it was a problem, but my Italian friends corrected me until it burned into my mind. So I would recommend switching between the languages, using both of them, so both of them remain active in your brain. But to get over your embarrassment problem, it's just lots and lots of trying until eventually you become numb to the embarrassment.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Cool. All right. So let's go with a question that I got from one of the, someone that can't make it today here. Let me ask it for him. It's just from Jonathan. A lot of people want to know this question, the answer to the question. So he asked, how do you prepare for Skype sessions?
Right.
What do you ask what do you do when you're in the beginning learning stage?
Okay, I'm going to give an answer that's not going to satisfy the perfectionists out there, but I have a very strict policy of having next to no preparation. Because when you prepare, the problem with preparing for a Skype conversation is there's a finite amount of preparation you can do, so there's always going to be something missing.
Yeah. And
that something missing is going to gnaw away at your confidence. So what I do when I'm approaching someone in person or when I'm Skyping is, you know, they're online, and I might think to myself, oh no, I have to look up how to say Happy Saturday, or, you know, wish them well, or I have to look something up. No, my strict policy is don't think about problems, because the more you prepare, obviously I'm not trying to say don't prepare, because that's what language learning is. We're preparing and we're studying and so on. But before a Skype session, I would try to clear your mind of all the worst case scenarios, that you'll make a mistake and then you'll be ostracized from the Spanish speaking community. Everyone in the world will agree to never speak Spanish with you, and they'll throw you to the bottom of the sea. You know, people will give the worst case scenarios in their head. To think, you know, I will die if I make a mistake. So I would say before a Skype session, just don't think about anything. Just press record. You're in front of someone. You have to say something. So I actually do not prepare necessarily for particular Skype sessions. I just think the idea that I have a Skype session coming up pressures me to study what I am currently studying. But I realize that there's only a finite amount of things I can study, so I will definitely be missing something. There will be a mistake, and I always tell people my goal in language learning is to make at least 200 mistakes a day, because I get them out of my system. So it's not super strategic and so on, but I would recommend people don't worry so much about preparing for the Skype session. Remember, you're just talking to another human being face to face. If a word comes up that you don't know, just open up a good dictionary or a bad dictionary like Google Translate. Just open it up and type in the word, and an OK translation will come up, and you'll be able to say the same. You're not confident of a grammar point, speak like Tarzan, put the words one after the other. The other person may or may not understand you, and that's fine.
So that's what you do.
That's what I do is I just press Skype. Press the call. That's how I prepare for a Skype call.
So what you said also when you're beginning, so doing the Skype session, you just use all the words that you know, and then another question is like what do you do in the beginning stage of the Skype session?
Sure. So in my first week when I had like practically no Japanese at all, the only preparation I did was I looked up in advance a list of things that I was likely to say, like my name is, I'm from, I have a 3-month project, you know, I want to go to Japan in January. I looked these up, or I had prepared them in a previous Skype session with somebody and written them down. And if I haven't internalized them, I just have a text file open while I'm in Skype.
Okay.
And it's like cheating, you know. I just have my cheat file I look at when I run out of things to say, and it might have some conversational connectors like Anthony Lauder always talks about. You know, that's a good question. You know, just get some way to kind of pass the time in a moment to give me a chance to think through something. So I would cheat in that way and then just use a dictionary. And people can see I uploaded a video 1 week into learning Japanese, and the whole video was in Japanese, and it was in Skype. But literally, pretty much everything I said, because I had next to no Japanese, pretty much everything I said involved writing it out in English into Google Translate. Google Translate is so bad for Japanese. But I did it anyway. I wrote it into Google Translate. I said the rubbish that it came up with, and sometimes it was understandable. And when the other person spoke and I didn't understand, I requested that he write that out in Japanese, because then I could copy and paste that into a dictionary. The reason I do that is because that means that all of our talking is only in Japanese. And I can still cheat and understand him and create somewhat understandable sentences by using a dictionary while I'm speaking. And the other person just has to know to be a little patient while I'm kind of copying and pasting and typing. But yeah, I would cheat during the first weeks and have that conversation thing ready. And now I don't need to do that. Now I've got the basics. I've got lots of building block words that I can build conversations with.
Got it. Cool. Thanks. Okay, Lena, your cam works now. Why don't you ask your question?
Yes, I'm here. My question is, when the new language has sounds which you are not accustomed. For example, in English there are a lot of vowels which I don't have in Russian. I studied them. The time I studied, I thought, oh, I know new vowels, so good. But there was one test to listen and recognize. I did this test like once a day, and they are still sound the same for me. Do you have some idea how I could improve my ear?
Yes. So you can listen over and over and over and over and over again, but I find that you recognize sounds much better when you can produce them yourself. So this is like, for instance, the nasal sounds in Portuguese, like avião. Avião. So
Avião.
at first, I didn't really understand. I didn't hear the difference between and ow, which also exists. Just the IU sound. I didn't really hear it. I didn't understand it, and people would say it over and over again. But to me, they sound the same. Until when I focused myself on being able to say a better, like I don't have it perfect, but I have a better sound through my nose. And I train myself over and over and over again. So I would say, because if something doesn't work, then you have to change your strategy. So obviously listening to the sounds over and over again isn't working. So I would try to sit down with a native over Skype and see, they might be saying what's the difference between and and you have to say the sounds yourself. So it's not about just hearing them. You will try to say and they'll be like, no, and you'll say, well, how do I do that? Do I have to open my mouth? If you look at Idausanes, the mimic method, he's got a great explanation of phonetics, which I thought was a very complicated linguistic thing. But he explained very well the diagram you usually see on Wikipedia that shows where the position of the vowels are. And that's very helpful, because I've been using that lately myself. And just knowing how you position your mouth, and like where your tongue is, and if your tongue is close to your teeth, and being able to produce the sound yourself means when other people produce it, you can suddenly distinguish the sounds better. And this is why my language learning advice is in general to get into it yourself, to speak yourself, because I find you understand things very well when you can say them yourself. And this is why, as everyone knows, I'm not a huge fan of listening for 1,000 hours and just reading until you're ready. That works great for people who are interested in listening and reading. But as you've shown, there are still situations where lots of listening do not help you distinguish the sound. So that's why I think producing, output, trying to say these things yourself will help you understand that.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Okay, Michael, go ahead.
My question was answered already.
Got it. Okay,
Excellent.
Roman. You got a question, Roman?
Just a second. Can you hear me? From my side, I heard everything I wanted to hear because before, as you mentioned, there were like a list of questions that my colleagues here were first to write them down. So I heard everything I wanted to hear. So I'm very grateful to hear all the useful information.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Kenneth, I don't think you're in the challenge, but you're here, so welcome.
Hey.
For Benny.
Hello? Can you guys
You got
hear
a
me?
question for Benny?
Yeah, sure. So, like you mentioned earlier. Okay, great. So, like you mentioned earlier, the first thing that you try to do is you try to kind of layer, kind of build that foundation. How do you choose the words that are going to be part of your foundation? Do you use a high-frequency dictionary list, or how do you go about that?
So I'm not a huge fan of the high-frequency list because a lot of these lists were compiled based on the written text. So they were compiled by analyzing newspapers. And I think that's fine if your goal in language is the priority is reading. However, when you speak, the vocabulary you tend to use is very different to reading vocabulary. And that's why I think like the first 100 or 200 words are pretty important because it's words like the, and, or, and all these like building blocks that you're going to need anyway. But once you get into the next hundreds, they're not as great. So what I try to do is create my own list. So for instance, the word blogger, that is never in the top 1,000 words. But for me, this is a very important word because this is what I do for a living. I'm a blogger. So I can't rely on those lists, and other things might be, mission or project in terms of language learning, or describing my life, or the word Ireland. Even the word Ireland, which is obviously extremely important to me in my conversations, tends to not be in those high-frequency lists because they're generic lists based on printing. So what I always do when I start a language is I create not words, but phrases. I'm from Ireland. I'm a writer. I want to go to Japan. I'm a blogger. My blog has so many readers. All of these things that are general introductions to me that I'm likely to have in the first minute after meeting somebody, I would prioritize that at the start of the conversation. Make those phrases, run them through a native, a free exchange or a language lesson on a site like iTalkI. Run them through a native, get a good translation, and then learn those translations. And this is something that you can say. And I would even import translations to flashcards on Anki to really drill them into your brain. So, and then you can also do single words, but I prefer to learn phrases. I find that single words out of context aren't that great, so I would tend to learn phrases first.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So this question is from Amela. I think she's 13 years old and she's learning Japanese. So her question is, what do you do when you're speaking only in your target language with a native speaker, and you get tongue-tied, and you don't know how to respond, and you don't understand what they're saying? What do you do?
Well, one of the first one of the first things I learned in that list of like my name is and so on is, I don't understand. Can you say that using different words? Because just saying can you repeat that doesn't really help because they will just repeat the same thing that you didn't understand before. But if they
Yeah.
use different words, it's possible that one will come up you understand.
Mm.
And I've written on the blog that one thing I do in terms, like, so I've talked about it, like how I learn what I want to say, but then when they start speaking back to you, my technique is not to try to understand everything they say, because that's not going to happen as a beginner learner. I try to understand one or two words and extrapolate based on that what their entire meaning is. But so this way I can understand more of what they're saying. But when I become tongue-tied, so there's a word I want to say, like I said before, I'll cheat. I'll just go on a dictionary online, look it up, and say it. And if I'm out and talking with people, then I would say, oh, one second, and I take out my smartphone and use my dictionary app and look up the word and say it. And I realize this is less than ideal, because obviously your goal in language learning is to have a fluent conversation where you're just naturally talking to the person. But you have to accept as a beginner learner that you can make these mistakes. Yeah. And that's fine. So if I become tongue-tied, if there's another way of thinking of it is, can you rephrase it in English? And I think this is one great thing I picked up in learning a lot of languages. It's not necessarily that my brain neurons are better. It's just that I found that, for instance, if I want to say a phrase in English, like let's say I want to say, or in my target language, let's say I want to say, next summer I'm going to travel in Spain. Yeah. And I don't know the word summer. I don't know the word travel. Let's say I don't know those two words. Well, before I give up, let's see. I would think for a second. Is there another way in English I can rephrase that? So instead of saying next summer I'm going to travel, I might say, oh, I know the word for July. So next July I'm going to go to Spain. So it's not exactly the same thing, but it's close enough. Yeah. I find like when I'm tongue-tied, it's because I don't know the exact word in English. Sorry, in the target language that I have created in my head in English. I created the sentence I'm trying to translate. So I would abandon that sentence and try to rephrase it in some way in English in my head, and then try to translate that sentence. So there are always ways to rephrase things, and as I said, I would just cheat and use a dictionary online if I'm an absolute beginner.
Awesome, great. Let's see. Well, we have 1 more minute, so let's see. Do you guys have any more questions in here? No? Okay, how do you manage your time? What do you recommend if somebody who's working 9 to 5, or they're really busy working, or going to school? What do you recommend? If they have limited time, what would get the most bang for their time?
Right. Well, people who have limited time still have time. So when I was in Rome, for instance, I worked a 63-hour-a-week job. This was from 6 p.m. to 6 p.m. the next day, with 6 hours sleep from midnight to 6 a.m., which I'd be on call for. I was working at the reception in the youth hospital. And so essentially, I would only have every second evening, 6 p.m. to like 11, free. Yeah. And then the rest of the week, so like every second evening, just one evening free. And I had next to no time, but I still managed to learn a lot of Italian and greatly improve my Italian because I did not waste my time. And I found that when people say they have no time, I realize this is rather cynical, but when I've talked to these people, I've found that in pretty much every case they are wasting time in some way. Even if they work like 2 jobs, they still have some way to wasting time, like they're watching a silly TV show. And if you give up TV, then maybe you're going to be able to put that time into learning language, even if it's just a half an hour or an hour a day. If you go to the pub with your friends every single night, maybe you might consider going to the pub because you need to relax and let your hair down. And this is what people always say, that they need this time to relax. But I would say try to relax in your target language, if possible. Even listen to podcasts in the language, try to watch a TV show in the language, some anime, whatever it may be. So there are always free slots of time, even when your day is packed, when you're waiting in the supermarket queue. That is time I utilize. And there's a video where, like a year ago when I was learning Egyptian Arabic in Brazil, I showed people I squeeze so much out of my time that I actually have an app on my phone that makes the screen see-through, because it puts the camera view on the phone on top of whatever app you're using. So I was walking, and I was walking with the phone right in front of me while I was trying to see where I was going, and I was looking at the camera of the phone to see where I was going while Anki was on. So I was doing flashcarding while I was walking. So like that walking time would have been 20 minutes a day or something, but that's 20 minutes that I was still learning a language.
I think the people who are in the challenge, they want to squeeze time out. They already squeeze like maybe half an hour, How they want to know how to be most effective using that hour or that half an hour that they squeeze out.
May I ask you a question?
We've got another question.
Yeah. Actually, what you said is really great. But if the number of languages a person already can speak and learns is more than 10, and if you work irregular hours, like from 12 till 14 at your job, it becomes really harsh, because during the lunch hour, you exercise, you listen to something. During a walk on the go, you also listen to something. But when a number of languages is more than 10, it's hard. It's really hard to manage.
What is your question?
My question is as Benny, as far as I know, knows more than 10 languages at the moment, as far as I'm not mistaken. How do you manage to squeeze out the time, if you at the tempo of more than 10 languages?
So what I'm actually doing now, for instance, is 100% of my time when I'm not working on the blog, for instance. 100% of my time is devoted only to Japanese. So these 3 months, even though I have other languages that I do need to maintain, I'm giving 100% of my attention to Japanese. When my time is up, then next year I'll get back into maintenance mode. And yes, when you get past 10 languages, it gets very hard. But I still, every day, normally, I would have 2 or 3 Skype sessions. Even if it's just a half an hour Skype, it doesn't always have to be an hour. Even a half an hour Skype session in Spanish and Portuguese and Italian and Mandarin. And this way I will get back into the language, keep it fresh in my mind, and have the teacher correct me and improve it. So when you want to take on a lot of languages, my approach is focus on one language and then maintain all your languages. And that's kind of the oscillation process I go through. Is I have a 3-month project where I'm learning just one language, and at the end of these 3 months, I can admit that the level of my other languages will have deteriorated a little bit. So my level will have gone down, and I accept that. But then from next year, I'm going to be working on all my languages, bring them back up to where they should be, and then continue improving them by reading a lot and listening to a lot of complicated interviews. So it's just a case of mixing and matching. But there is a certain time you reach that you can only distribute your time among so many languages. I don't think this is an issue that a lot of people will be losing sleep over, because if you're a polyglot with 10 languages, you've already got some system set up. So I generally wouldn't talk to polyglots and give them advice, because they've already got a good system. So I generally would focus on just helping people learning their first language.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much, Benny. Sorry we are 5 minutes over time.
That's quite all right. It was great to talk to everybody, and great job, Brian, on moderating and providing lots of very interesting questions.
Cool.
Really appreciate it.
See you soon, dude.
Yeah, I'll see all of you soon. Good luck, everyone, with the +1 challenge.
Yeah.
I'll be checking in on all your videos. Keep up the progress. Bye.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.